The meeting that we're all in today, it's Fighting Antisemitism. Our speaker is Anna Gluckstein. She is a teacher in Hackney and a member of the Haringey branch of the Socialist Workers' Party. And we also have a bookmarks stall downstairs, and these are just some of the books that you can get there and also that are relevant to the meeting. So definitely check that out. It's all happening downstairs. So without further ado, I will just go over to Anna to kick off this meeting.
Thank you. So if you want to understand anti-Semitism today, you don't actually have to look further than an article that was in The Guardian on the 14th of June, where Viktor Orban, the Hungarian Prime Minister of the far-right Fidesz party, said the following about the Hungarian Jewish billionaire and philanthropist, George Soros. So what he said: now it's completely obvious that there are business circles that have an interest in war, and they're symbolised by George Soros. So literally, it's Jews who are responsible for prolonging the war in Ukraine. And anti-Semitism is rising across the globe. As all forms of racism increase, all forms of bigotry rise. And the pandemic actually saw a huge increase in conspiracy theories. And the far right were very active in the anti-vaxxers movement. And I'm not saying that everyone anti-vax is far right, of course I'm not. But if you type anti-vax into Google, very quickly you're in a rabbit hole of horrible anti-Semitism. And in fact, on some demonstrations against COVID restrictions, you could see the yellow star, you could see leaflets pushing anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, which accused Jews of spreading the pandemic to control the world. And in the UK in 2021, the Home Office reported a 12% increase in anti-Semitic attacks on the years before. So we have to understand what anti-Semitism is, and we have to understand where it comes from, its roots. And I'm going to quote for you, I'm going to give you the full quote of a very good letter that was written in The Guardian in 2018 by well-known Jewish academics and celebrities. And this is what they say, this is their definition. Anti-Semitism is discrimination, prejudice, or hostility against us because we are Jews. It's a form of racism. It may be manifested in violence, denial of rights, discriminatory acts, prejudice-based behaviour, verbal or written statements, negative stereotypes, or scapegoating. Holocaust denial, the blood libel, conspiracy theories about supposed Jewish power or the alleged priorities of Jews worldwide are all expressions of anti-Semitism. Criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitic unless motivated by anti-Jewish prejudice, and I will talk more about Israel later. So what are the roots of anti-Semitism? We as Marxists always look to the economic and social conditions of the time where ideas come from. And Leon Abraham, a Jewish Trotskyist, developed a theory around where anti-Semitism comes from in his brilliant book, The Jewish Question, which I'm sure they have bookmarks as well. Tragically, he perished in Auschwitz, but his impressive book provides an invaluable analysis of where anti-Semitism comes from, and that it was not some eternal fact lasting throughout history, as some Zionists would say, that Jews have always been discriminated against as Jews, but was actually based on the particular economic conditions of the time. And he described how after AD 70 and the fall of the Second Temple, there was a well-entrenched diaspora, dispersal of Jews already across the Middle East, and they were the sole intermediaries between the East and West. So he says, if the Jew played an important role in trade in preceding epochs, they now became practically the only intermediaries between the East and West. Jew became more and more the synonym for merchant. Linked to trade is the money that you need to purchase the goods. And so usury, money lending, which was forbidden to Christians, was one of the roles played by Jews. And as local indigenous merchants in various parts of the world started to emerge, they started to push the Jews out of trading. So more and more Jews became associated with usury, money lending, rather than trade. And as feudalism went into decline, the Jews, to whom some of the nobles, the aristocracy, were very indebted, became the object of ruling class hatred and the victims of state-sponsored anti-Semitic attacks. And this marks the first wave of anti-Semitism. And this is where it's really important to understand the ideological association with Jewish people and money was established. But remember, Jews did all sorts of jobs, and where they were allowed to own land in places like Northern Africa, they assimilated. So we have to understand that ideologies have material roots, but they can adapt and live on well beyond their origins. Racism is not static. So the so-called second wave of anti-Semitism comes from the reactionary backlash against the Enlightenment, the French Revolution of 1789, the revolutionary wave of 1848. And Jews were blamed for the uprisings by the old ruling class and for the first time described as a race, as the ideas of biological difference and scientific explanation for people's differences came into their own. And as economic crisis hit Eastern Europe, which was more backward, more feudal, the anti-Semitic violence actually consumed hundreds of thousands of Jewish lives, using pogroms, which is a Russian word for genocidal attack, which involved villages being destroyed, families murdered. You just read the descriptions of babies being torn apart, rape, etc. And in Tsarist Russia, in 1881 alone, 60,000 Jews were murdered. After the First World War, the revolutionary wave, which swept Europe, started by the Russian Revolution in 1917, combined with a severe economic crisis, which led the German ruling class to turn to Adolf Hitler and the Nazis to solve this crisis, to smash the revolutionary working class in Germany. And it was Hitler who took anti-Semitism as far as is possible, the industrialised mass murder of 6 million Jewish people in the Holocaust. So what is the role of anti-Semitism? That's kind of the roots, and the Nazis. Fascism, at its core, is about smashing the working class, using the petty bourgeois, the small business owners, at its heart, to form a mass movement strong enough to break the working class. It doesn't necessarily have to have racism, but as we see, racism is a fantastic mobilising factor. So fascism requires an ideology that can vent the hatred of this petty bourgeois to the two sides that are destroying them in their minds. One is the unions. In times of crisis, the unions, led by Marxists, etc., fighting for higher wages that the small businessman can't pay. On the other side, you've got the financial institutions, the big business, who can afford to pay those money. They feel squashed by those too. At the same time, you have to vent the anger, divert the anger away from the capitalist system itself. Fascism is not an anti-capitalist system, however much they use that politics, however much they use that language. And the Jews served the Nazis perfectly for this, by being a scapegoat, both for the hatred of the labour movement and the hatred of big business. And so I'm quoting here, you have to quote the Nazis every now and again, from a Nazi newspaper in 1923. How wonderfully the stock exchange Jew and the leader of the workers cooperate. Moses Cohen on the one side encourages other bosses to refuse the workers' demands, while his brother Isaac in the factory incites the masses. Anti-Semitism, I would argue, provides a total world picture and rationale, and it is the glue that holds together far-right ideology in a way that the daily bread and butter racism of Islamophobia, anti-migrant racism can't do. So I've looked at the roots of it and the role for Nazis, and I'm going to look at what it's like today, anti-Semitism, what's similar, but also what's different from pre-war. So the similarities, the notion of Jewish finance and capital, running the world behind the scenes, the puppet masters, etc. Even with the far-right Great Replacement theory, this idea that Muslims and non-whites and migrants are going to have so many more babies, they're replacing white people, it is the Jews that are blamed for driving this forward. And as I said earlier, anti-Semitism, even when hidden, provides a heart of ideology for both Nazi and far-right groups. And this helps explain the constant demonisation of George Soros. He's not only a rich Jewish man, he also supports refugees and Roma people and funded education for them and other NGOs. And there are so many examples of anti-Soros statements. I've just picked out one. So this is Ivo Sasek, a Swiss Holocaust denier, who in 2020 posted on his organisation's website about COVID that, and I quote him, "There is another laboratory in Wuhan that works with viruses, financed by American billionaire George Soros." Okay, so I've looked at the similarities of anti-Semitism before the Second World War and today. We now have to look at two key differences. And one is about the impact of the formation of the State of Israel, and the other is far-right attitudes to the Holocaust, because they have to deal with it. So, in terms of the formation of Israel, the state of Israel is based on a political ideology, Zionism. And Zionism is a political response to historic anti-Semitism and the murderous pogroms and the Holocaust I mentioned earlier, but it started around the pogroms. This response was to argue that Jewish people couldn't live with non-Jews and have to seek a homeland of their own. Before the rise of Hitler and the Nazis, Zionism was not the major political affiliation of Jewish people, and numbers going to Palestine were very small compared to those going to America or Western Europe. However, the disaster and trauma of the Holocaust, where half of the world's Jews were systematically murdered in these advanced factories of death, combining with a West who both during and after the war were very reluctant to let Jews in, made the Zionist project an imperative amongst many Jews, the majority of Jews. We have to be clear at this point, the Zionist idea is a reaction to racism, but tragically, it reflects the ideas of racial division. So I need to have a drink now. I might pour it in there so I don't stop all the time. Okay. So the central tenet that Jews can't live safely alongside non-Jews is a racial policy. And added to this, the only way that homeland could be created for the famous quote, a land without people for people without land, was to rely on Western imperial backing. Where Palestine is situated made it a very important trade route, and then it being at the heart of the oil fields, which is so vital to modern capitalism, meant there was continued massive investment, particularly from America into Israel. So we argue that Israel is a colonial settler state, with the Palestinians being dispossessed and expelled, and the UN say there are about 5 million Palestinian refugees at the moment, and that Israel is the attack dog, the watchdog of the West in the Middle East. And I want to make it very clear at this point that we separate Zionism from Jewish people. Not all Jews are Zionists, and not all Zionists are Jewish, and we totally reject any anti-Semitic tropes about Jews and big finance. We totally reject conspiracy theories about Jews, and we don't just say this, we act on it, and I'll talk more about that later. And we totally call out anyone for blurring these lines. There can be no concessions to anti-Semitism. Therefore, it is a totally wrong response to the brutality of the State of Israel by a small minority of Muslims and other people who support the Palestinians to blame all Jews. And tragically, there are an increased number of anti-Semitic attacks, particularly in Europe, in response to Israeli government brutality. Again, to reiterate, this is fundamentally wrong. However, a wrong and anti-Semitic response to imperialism and oppression is not to be equated with the anti-Semitism of the far right, which is conscious, deep-rooted, Nazi-inspired, with the Holocaust as their model. So I want to now look at the attitude of the far right to Israel, because it can seem contradictory. On the one hand, there's the obvious racism of wanting there to be a place somewhere far away where the Jews are, and the usefulness of Israel to Western imperialism. There's also the admiration of this ethno-nationalism, the aggressive way it deals with Palestinians and Muslims, and its strong militarism and its strong leaders. In this way, you can have the far right of France, Holland, UK, Hungary, other countries being pro-Israel. So when Naftali Bennett became Prime Minister of Israel in 2021, Orban wrote that he was pleased to confirm his commitment to the security of Israel again. And at the same time, he reassured the Jewish state of Hungary's support in situations when it is treated in a biased and unfair manner on the international stage. Marine Le Pen has promised to defend Israel and act as a, quote, shield for Jews in the face of radical Islam and other sources of anti-Semitism. So they can be anti-Semitic and support the state of Israel at the same time. The attitude of the far right to the Holocaust also has to be looked at. So they have to deal with it. And those parties which didn't distance themselves from the Holocaust didn't fare so well. So Nick Griffin, the BNP leader, said the biggest problem for the BNP was, and I quote him, hobbyism, Hitlerism, Holocaust. And as I say, the Holocaust is a major stumbling block to rebuilding openly fascist, racial supremacist groups. So there are still some who stick to Holocaust denial. Didn't happen. Golden Dawn deny the existence in Greece, deny the existence of gas chambers and death camps, even though during the Second World War, 70,000, 81% of the Greek Jewish population were sent to those death camps. Increasingly common is the far right trying to limit their own country's responsibility for the Holocaust. And this is highlighted by Eric Zemmour, who's leader of a new French fascist party split off from Marine Le Pen called Reconquête, who got 7% of the vote in the first round of the presidential elections just recently. He's viciously anti-Muslim, but he's also defended France's collaborationist Vichy regime during the Second World War, approvingly claiming that it deported foreign Jews before French Jews. So that's all right, isn't it? He even denies that deported Jews were taken to death camps. I just want to say as an aside, Marine Le Pen's fascist organisation, which has distanced itself from overt anti-Semitism, but has its roots also in Vichy France and the Waffen-SS, has just, we're all aware, has just increased its MPs in Parliament from 8 to 89 at a tenfold increase, and more than 30 million voted for her to be president. It's an extremely serious situation in France. Let's look at Hungary. So we're talking about rehabilitation again. So Admiral Horthy, who was the ruler of Hungary from 1920 to 1944, supported Mussolini and Hitler in the 1930s. He entered World War II on Hitler's side and was responsible for dozens of laws restricting the rights of Hungary's Jewish population, which laid the ground for their eventual deportation to the death camps. And Orban describes Horthy as an exceptional statesman. Now I'm going to turn, so I've looked at anti-Semitism on the right, I'm now going to turn to an issue that's had a devastating impact on the left, the question of anti-Semitism on the left. Now, tragically, some Zionists and the right have been using the accusation of anti-Semitism against those who criticise the Israeli state and support the Palestinian struggle. This has been aimed at the left, and we have seen the process deepen since the increased use of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition, IHRA, their definition of anti-Semitism. And there is much to agree with in the definition. The problem is the examples. So the key example being this. So this is from the IHRA definition. Denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination. So this is seen as anti-Semitic. Denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination, e.g. by claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavour. Now this definition puts everyone who is against what the state of Israel does to Palestinians into the camp of anti-Semites. This includes all Jews like myself and many others, but also includes Amnesty International, who in February published a report into human rights in Israel-Palestine, and this is the title of it. Israel's apartheid against Palestinians, a cruel system of domination and a crime against humanity. Okay, I'm not going to talk more about Palestine in this meeting, but that's clear. It's a racist state. In Britain, we've seen this process of attacking, weaponising anti-Semitism on the left, going deeply into our politics with the attacks that took place against Jeremy Corbyn and his leadership of the Labour Party. I think at this point it's important to say that anti-Semitism, like all forms of bigotry, percolates throughout society. And so there are examples of people sharing anti-Semitic tropes and worse in the Labour Party. And the EHRC report into the Labour Party points out some failings of process that we may agree with. But this absolutely has to be called out and stopped. However, to accuse Corbyn, who's been a committed anti-racist and opponent of anti-Semitism all his political life, is both wrong and dangerous. It's wrong because I've got 50 examples. I cannot read them out to you because that'll be the rest of my meeting. 50 examples of Corbyn fighting against anti-Semitism. I'll just read 4 of them. April 1977, he was part of the defence of Jewish inhabitants in Wood Green from a neo-Nazi march. 7th of November 1990, Corbyn signs motion condemning the rise of anti-Semitism. 11th of April 2000, Jeremy Corbyn signs motion condemning David Irving for being a Holocaust denier. 28th of January 2002, Jeremy Corbyn signs motion praising football clubs for commemorating Holocaust Memorial Day, and so on. The process of silencing the voices of left anti-Zionist Jews and others on the left has seen an obscene rise in actions against Labour Party members. So people will be aware of this quite famous case. A woman called Diane Neslin, who was 82 when this happened, about a year ago. She's an Orthodox Jew who keeps a kosher house. She was investigated 3 times by the Labour Party for anti-Semitism. And this was based on a tweet she made, which she said the following: "The existence of the State of Israel is a racist endeavour, and I am an anti-racist Jew." Labour had to drop the case after a legal challenge. Currently, according to the Jewish Voice for Labour, if you are Jewish, you are 20 times more likely to have an action against you around anti-Semitism than you are if you are not. So, I said it's wrong, But also it's dangerous, and it's dangerous for two reasons, the attack on the left. Firstly, because by focusing on the left, you're actually distracting from looking at the natural home of the anti-Semites, which is on the far right. And by demobilising the left, you actually undermine the ability of the one group who are able to fight this anti-Semitism to do it properly. And secondly, it's dangerous because it massively undermines our ability to call for solidarity action and call out the racism of the Israeli state against the Palestinians in their struggle for justice. So that's that. Now I want to look at anti-Semitism on the right. So in 2017, there was a survey by the Institute for Jewish Policy Research that found that anti-Semitism was, amongst those who identify as very right-wing, was 2 to 4 times higher than among the general population. If we look at the Tories, we know Johnson, their leader, is a horrible Islamophobe and racist. He, unsurprisingly, is also an anti-Semite. In a book he wrote when he was shadow minister, he described Jewish oligarchs who run the media and figure the figures to fix elections. He also portrayed a Jewish character as a malevolent, stingy, snake-like Jewish businessman who exploits immigrant workers for profits, all the stereotypes. And there were many examples in the Tory party of anti-Semitism. But I'm just going to look at one investigation. This is from 2019. So there were 3 MPs, they were people standing for election. 3 of them investigated anti-Semitism. I'll just look at 2 of them. So Sally Ann Hart shared a video with an image implying that Jews control the EU. She also liked a Nazi slogan on Facebook. She's not just anti-Semitic, this woman. She also said that people with learning difficulties should have been given less benefits because they don't understand money. I mean, she's a really lovely person. Lee Anderson, is an active member of a Facebook group where Soros conspiracy theories have been promoted, and one of these members of this Facebook group is Tommy Robinson. There were no publications of these findings. These 2 are both MPs. And the 3rd person investigated is the leading member of the Tory party. He just didn't get in. He didn't win his vote to be an MP. So the fact that the Tories have hard anti-Semites in it should not be a surprise. And as I know I'm reiterating it again and again, but it's really clear that we have to know this. Historically, anti-Semitism has been propagated by the far right. The pogroms, the anti-Semitic propaganda, the Holocaust, all perpetrated by the far right, and all opposed to the left. As I said earlier, Hitler used the hatred of Jews both against capitalism and against the left, but really it was against the left. And the picture has not changed. In 2017, a Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, again you'll be familiar with, brought Nazis onto the streets shouting, "The Jews shall not replace us," which when met by anti-fascists led to Heather Heyer being run over and killed by one of the Nazis. In October 2018, there was a mass shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, where 11 Jews were killed and 6 were wounded, and some of them were Holocaust survivors. And it was the deadliest attack ever on the Jewish community in the United States. This year, Viktor Orban's Fidesz-led coalition stormed back to power in Hungary with 53% of the vote, while the hardcore fascist Our Homeland movement entered parliament for the first time. Now, Our Homeland movement are viciously anti-migrant, anti-Roma, anti-LGBT+, and they were split off from Jobbik, who were previously openly anti-Semitic. One of their leaders is a man called Tariq Ali, who has been photographed doing Nazi salutes on many occasions. So the title of the meeting, Fighting Anti-Semitism Today. The SWP has a proud tradition of fighting anti-Semitism, informed by Trotsky's magnificent writings on what German workers needed to do to stop the rise of Hitler, the tactic of the United Front. And I'm going to read his definition. The United Front tactic is an initiative whereby the communists, so the left inspired by the Russian Revolution, the communists proposed to join with all workers belonging to other parties and all unaligned workers in a common struggle to defend the immediate basic interests of the working class. That you come together and you fight over this one thing. And what he said about what was happening in Germany was very prophetic, and he wrote this in 1931. His organisation was tiny. He didn't have the people on the ground to make this strategy, which would have worked, happen. So he says the following: worker communists, you are hundreds of thousands of millions. You cannot leave for any place. There are not enough passports for you. Should fascism come to power, it will ride over your skulls and spines like a terrific tank. Your salvation lies in merciless struggle, and only a fighting unity with the Social Democratic and Labour Party workers can bring victory. Make haste, worker communists. You have very little time left. And it was prophetic because the riding over their skulls and spines literally happened under Nazi Germany. And the United Front approach is what we bring to stand up to racism, unite against fascism. And there are countless examples of us responding to anti-Semitic incidents. In the 1970s, when the National Front Nazi Party at the time was rising in the polls, and the Anti-Nazi League, which involved the SWP, Labour Party members and others, many others, was challenging them effectively, the National Front called out Tony Cliff, a founding member of the SWP, as being actually a Jew named Yigal Gluckstein. The response of the SWP was to declare that we are all Jews. Other examples involve the terrible fact that there have had to be so many vigils and protests after desecration of Jewish graves. So there was one in Manor Park Cemetery in 1998, the East Ham Jewish Cemetery in 2007, and I mention those two particularly because Jeremy Corbyn was at both of those. In Manchester in 2018, there were 30 headstones desecrated and many of them smashed, and a vigil was called, and our members were part of it. In December 2021, after an attack on a Jewish man in West Hampstead, a protest was called in solidarity. Our comrades were part of that. In January this year, there was a horrible attack which hospitalised 2 older Jewish shopkeepers in my neck of the woods, Haringey. So I and a Labour councillor, who's a member of the Clyde Road Mosque, Khalid Moeed, took a letter of support and solidarity to the shop owned by the victims. So in conclusion, as revolutionary socialists, we are always on the side of the oppressed, and what Lenin called the tribune of the oppressed, and we fight to unite our class across all the divisions which the ruling class promote to keep their power. And this means we are fundamentally opposed to anti-Semitism and racism in any form, and see it for what it is, an ideology which scapegoats those not responsible for the problems in society. And it's not an accident that a deeply unpopular Tory government, residing over the worst attack on our living standards for decades, turns to the deportation of asylum seekers to Rwanda in a callous attempt to blame migrants, play the race card, to blame them for the crisis. And as the economic crisis deepens, which it is, we're all going into recession, etc., so do these vicious ideas. And we've seen where this can end, if unchallenged, in Auschwitz. And our job is to unite with anyone who wishes to fight racism and to encourage all forms of resistance to this rotten system which is capable of such horrors, so as to end it once and for all.
Thanks a lot, Anna. That was a brilliant introduction, and I'm sure everyone has a lot to come back on in discussion. So what we're going to do, if you just stick your hand up and I'll call on people, I'll give everyone, so everyone will have 3 minutes, I'll give everyone a 1 minute warning, and then I'll tell you to sum up at 3 minutes. So does anyone want to make a contribution or a question?
That person there.
Yeah.
Hi, I have a question. What's your opinion on the impact of the internet on anti-Semitism? Because I think that one of the reasons anti-Semitism has risen so much in recent years as well is because of the internet. Because it's a way you can anonymously put your opinions online with not much regulation of what you say. And I think while there has been some good aspects of the internet in support, there's also been a lot of it allowing anti-Semitism and enabling it. So I wanted to get your opinion on that.
Sure. That's a great contribution. Thanks. Yeah. I'll just take this person here, and then I'll take the person right at the back.
My name is Volker Moser. I come from Germany, and I want to come to one point which I slightly disagree. Probably, I don't know, because you said in the beginning of your speech, you said that anti-Semitism is on the rise. Now we have research in Germany from 2000 to 2015 also that anti-Semitism was getting down. So halved within 15 years. Since 2016 or 17, it's been on the rise, and fantastically on the rise, because the criteria, what anti-Semitism is, have changed. So research nowadays would come to absurd height of anti-Semitism of 40%, because one question of this research is if you could understand that politics of Israel leads to anti-Semitism. If you agree with this, you are an anti-Semit. So I think this is a stupid question, or it's not clear to make a distinction between anti-Semit. You could be an anti-Semit, of course, I agree, but you mustn't. So the rise of the official figures nowadays, you have 40% of people in Germany being anti-Semites, according to these new criteria, whereas only 5% of German people would resent a Jewish neighbor. So this doesn't fit at all, I think. We must be careful about official figures. What I don't want to imply with this is that the danger of something repeating itself, like the Holocaust, has gone down in Germany. On the contrary, we have a new fascist party in Germany, which is in the tradition of the Nazi party, the AfD, and at the same time,
That's 1 minute.
And I would say, just like 1930, the majority of the German population wouldn't agree with anti-Semitism at the time, it still happened. So you mustn't have a rise of anti-Semitism. That the danger of a repetition of something like the Holocaust could happen if there is a party which takes power and with a program like this without the German population consenting to it. That's the real danger.
Thank you. So it's just the person right at the back, and then I'll take this person here.
Yes, I mean, I think there are more objective ways of. I agree with Volkart that the kind of corruption by Zionism of definitions of anti-Semitism is a problem for all sorts of reasons, not just the one he mentions. But there are more objective ways of testing, like the number of attacks on Jewish people in synagogues and Jewish graveyards and so on. And I think Anna was talking a lot about that. But I wanted to focus on this apparent paradox that the far right tend to support Israel these days, even though they're anti-Semitic. And I think to understand it, we have to see the way in which far right ideology has changed. Not completely, but it's changed in terms of the, if you like, the popular dimension of far right racism. It's Islamophobia. It's targeting Muslims, campaigning against Muslims and so on. Think of Trump's Muslim ban almost as soon as he became president. And this is very, very clear in Europe. I mean, going well beyond the far right, unfortunately, but with the far right making the basis of their popular racist agitation primarily attacking Muslims. Now, if you think Muslims are the great threat to Christian civilization, then Israel seems like a bastion against the Muslim threat. I mean, it's also to do with the extreme militarism and nationalism of Israel, as Anna said. But I think the link with Islamophobia is very, very important. But the final point I want to make is there's a shift in far right ideology, but anti-Semitism is still very important. Why? Because it allows them to posture as anti-capitalist. So Soros is targeted, not just, he's a powerful Jew, but he's a powerful super rich Jew. He's a powerful super rich Jew who's involved in the financial system. If you read Hitler or, read about Hitler, it's probably better to hold your nose when reading his speeches or anything like that. He goes on endlessly about cosmopolitan Jewish finance capital. It's cosmopolitan Jewish finance capital that is responsible for the Second World War. Churchill and Roosevelt are the agents of cosmopolitan Jewish finance capital. The Holocaust is the way in which we hit back at them, and so on and so forth. So there's this obscene pseudo-racist anti-capitalism that Hitler and the classical fascist movements use, and these people still need it today because it allows them to posture as anti-systemic forces rather than being the system's last line of defence.
Yeah, thank you. So it's just this person here, and then I think there was a hand at the back there.
Just running on from that point slightly, just taking things back perhaps to some basic kind of questions. So somebody like Nigel Farage, it's so contradictory, what is sort of what I feel coming out of this, that somebody like Nigel Farage wants to present himself as anti-establishment, not coming from the system, because there's such a sort of exhaustion amongst working class people from the system, the crushing, brutal system that we live in, that somebody that declares themselves not coming from the system, being against the system, being somehow fighting against the establishment, can create, can draw people towards them, because there is so little opposition in the official opposition, but somebody like Boris Johnson, who's, as Anna has proved, he's an anti-Semite. He's deeply racist, deeply awful, homophobic, anti-Semitic person, and yet he supports the state of Israel. And this fundamental contradiction is so important to understand, and I just wondered if Anna and perhaps other people in the meeting could talk about how, specific examples perhaps, about how the state of Israel itself does serve the interests of Western capitalism, and not just right-wing leaderships in Europe, for instance, and I include Boris Johnson in that and the Tories, but also the social democratic parties as well, backing the state of Israel at the same time as saying they're anti-racist. So I just wondered if people might refer to some of the ways in which the state of Israel is serving the system that crushes us, brutalizes us, exploits us and oppresses us.
Thank you. So it was this person at the back, and then I will go to this person here, just in front.
Yeah, three quick points. I was, people may remember a couple of years ago, Alder, who obviously Anna talked about very informed way. Alder visited Britain, hosted by Boris Johnson. Standard racism, UAF, Jewish socialist group called a demonstration. At short notice, only about 3 days, around 60 people turned up. Now, on the one hand, you can think, well, that's not much. But I think it was important, it was important to make a stand and say, this man is, there used to be something called the call-down sanitaire, whereby certain people like Macron, who's talked about Julie Sherry's meeting yesterday, once upon a time, maybe, would have had nothing to do with the likes of Le Pen. That's all been broken, as we've seen again and again across Europe, and particularly, with Johnson meeting Orban, that shows it writ large. The good thing about it was the demonstration there were some Hungarians to that one. Secondly, it went around Hungary quite a bit, not massively, but it made certain outlets which poured all sorts of scorn on it, but it gave a tiny boost to the very difficult job Hungarian anti-fascists have got. And before lockdown, anybody who went to Hungary or Poland, particularly, and saw the level of open anti-Semitism, swastikas all over the place, etc., etc., etc. The rise of far-right and neo-Nazi groupings, often street level, but often not street level, and having an influence in Parliament, particularly in Parliament, obviously Hungary's been mentioned, is quite a shocking thing. I think what Alex Kalinikov said is very important, because you think about someone like so-called Tommy Robinson, who often, over time, wraps himself in the Israeli flag, but then, shock horror, he'll appear in Manchester a few years ago, and part of his bodyguard were open Polish Nazis. These were open Polish Nazis. They later got deported, but he didn't mind getting photographed with them, having a great time and having a beer with them. He let the mask slip in that way. The last thing I want to say, really, think about the internet. I think it's true a million times. To some extent, sometimes when there's open anti-Semites on things like Twitter, for instance, they get pulled. But look at someone like, albeit as a cartoon figure in one way, it's like Lawrence Fox. A failed, bizarre person who's now putting up things like swastikas, ha 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 ha, in a Mickey take of pride. That shows the level of how how extreme some of these people have got, and someone like that, and it shows a dirty undertone. There's a group called Patriotic Alternative, who are very small in relative terms. They're nothing like the BNP was in this country years ago with councillors, MEPs, and so on. But they're talking about anti-systemic ideology. They're trying to build around anti-Semitism and anti-system. Now they're not getting that far. But, as you might know, they are appearing on campuses up and down the country to a degree. And they are somebody, whenever they publicly have the guts, frankly, to appear, they're somebody I'm sure will be opposing very vigorously. The last one, just quickly, was the rise
I have to ask you to sum up, sorry.
Oh, sorry. The rise of neo-Nazi terror cells, particularly in Britain. You know, we've seen National Action, we've seen people jailed just the other week. These are in a sense, is a product of the collapse of the electoral strategy the likes of the BNP had, but they are coming, and their ideology is hard and fast. Fortunately, they've been largely, a number of them in jail, but they keep coming, and they keep coming. It's no accident they keep coming.
So it's just this person here, and then I'll take the person behind as well. Oh,
Me?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I'm in UCU. About 10 or 11 years ago, I was the chair of the Union's Equality Committee. The union was accused of being anti-Semitic because our conference wanted to discuss the possibility of supporting BDS campaign, and we were taken to court. Sorry?
BDS.
Sorry, boycott, divestment and sanctions campaign, pro-Palestinian campaign. And we were accused by the various Zionist organisations, the Board of Deputies and the Jewish Leadership Campaign, of being anti-Semitic. We were taken to court. And the High Court actually threw out that attack on us. In fact, it was a complete disaster for them because they were accused of lying in court and so on and so forth. The point I'm trying to make here is that it's important that when we are unjustly accused of being anti-Semitic, that we actually fight back, that we take the fight to them. And it's something that I think, unfortunately, it's something that Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour leadership should have done and didn't do. And it's pushed us back years, I think, into a position that we absolutely don't want to be in. That's the first point. Second point is just picking up on what Anna was saying about the importance of the United Front. I'm from Wakefield. We've just had a by-election campaign in Wakefield. Now, actually, Labour took the seat back from the Tories, but the point was that there were three far-right fascist candidates standing, including Britain First, people may know of, who have they're very deeply rooted, obviously, in Islamophobia, but their roots are also anti-Semitic, and they had a serious campaign. They had two vans, we called them the hate vans, driving around the city every day, spewing out a message, calling for support for their policies and so on. Yeah, and we mounted the campaign. Now the point about this was the campaign was not just a few SWP members. It was through Stand Up to Racism. It involved a whole number of Labour Party members, ex-Labour Party members, people in the Green Party and so on. And we mounted, I think, a really effective campaign that resulted in the fascist candidates being, kept very firmly in the margins. They got something like 300 votes, I think, in the end. But it was a disaster for their campaign, but it was a vindication of the strategy of the United Front, really working together, whatever the political party, working together to marginalise and keep them to the fringes. And I think it's absolutely, Trotsky's lesson is absolutely crucial for us as we go forward in terms of taking on the growing threat from the far right.
Thank you. So it's just the person behind, and then I'll take the man in the blue shirt.
I'm in the NEU, National Education Union, in East London, where the misuse of the IHRA definition is a huge issue in our schools. And the main target, of course, on the left is the Muslim community. after the attack on the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Sheikh Jarrah neighbourhoods, there was a huge demonstration in London, and the tubes that I came on from East London were full of young Muslim people coming across. After that, straight away, there was a real clamping down because a lot of them came away from the demo with Palestinian wristbands and badges and things like that, and a real clamping down in schools saying they couldn't identify with that. They couldn't discuss it even in schools. There had to be assemblies where a really let's look at the two sides sort of equally approached by solutions, not sides, was imposed on them. So it created a big concern. There was a big meeting of parents, and I was on the stall recently with the PSC. One of the Muslim colleagues I was with looked up at the town and said, "There's a Ukrainian flag up there because the country's been occupied, but we can't put that up. We can't even put it out in school." So people really feel they've been shut up, and it doesn't matter how many times. I mean, there is a danger that some Muslims respond in a way, but how many times have the leaders in the Muslim community, when they called a protest and deliberately set out to invite Jewish speakers and make it clear it's not about Jews, just like we say it's Zionism, not Jews. Doesn't matter how many times they say that, it's still that slur is still put on them. So just to say that's out there, but it's really politicising a lot of the Muslim community, of course, and a lot of them are drawing left-wing conclusions rather than going the other way, the majority.
Thank you. So it's just the person in the blue shirt?
Yeah.
Oh. Sorry. Did you? Yeah. So yeah, you. Yeah. And then the person at the front here.
Okay, just a couple of kind of quick points. I think one thing, it doesn't help if we quote people. So somebody says something 5 years ago. Here's a quote. Here's another quote from 10 years ago. That means they're racist. So people have said Boris is racist, but I think it cheapens the whole kind of debate a bit, and it would put a lot of people in a bit of difficulty because people stop listening after a while because they just see it as the sloganizing. I think it is better to have a much more evidence-based kind of discussion. I mean, if you pick up 2 or 3 quotes that Boris has said, which may be racist and so on, and he supporters of Boris have come up with 5,000 things he said, which are pro, race or whatever. So I think it's difficult. They always quote the cabinet they've got, non-white people, etc., etc. So I think they're kind of sloganizing. It doesn't kind of have the debate. I think, in my view, I think the speaker touched on it a bit, is that you can almost link the increase in anti-Semitism or anti-Semitic attacks to the actions of the Israeli government. Whenever they go and oppress the Palestinians, or there's some nasty incidents happen, people here get pissed off, and somebody or other will do something silly. And so I think that is kind of a fairly kind of close link. The other interesting thing I find is that suddenly over the Labour Party's kind of involvement with anti-Semitism or Corbyn and so on, is that a huge number of people in the Jewish I suppose right-wing or middle class or intelligentsia all came out and signed loads of documents, was speaking everywhere saying how there's a rise of anti-Semitism, or the anti-Semitism needs to be looked at in the Labour Party, and so on. Yet whenever there is any kind of act by the Israeli government against the Palestinians, you never hear a squeak. And I think it enrages a lot of people who think that they are just a bit one-sided. They're silent when there's all the attacks on the Palestinians, but when there's some kind of a reaction by stupid kids or whatever it is here, then suddenly everybody rises up to kind of decry all that. I think all of those kind of things are things which are kind of worth noting. I mean, in my view, finally, just to say that we use the term anti-Semitism, but it has changed over centuries, from the very early kind of times when it was against moneylenders and so on, and you could say it's against moneylenders or it's against Jews. It's a debatable issue, but it's became much more of a serious kind of issue after the Sykes-Picot kind of treaty, Balfour Treaty, and more recently, since the Second World War, the Holocaust, and all the Jews being allowed at homeland in Palestine at the expense of the Palestinians. Those are the kind of key moments when the meaning of anti-Semitism changed. The worst thing is today, where the term anti-Semitism has been hijacked by people who are trying to dilute it to anything that would mean a criticism of the Israeli government. And that's, so I suppose if I had a question to the speaker, I would say, where is the dividing line between what is, where you can where the criticism of the state of Israel and its policies, versus anti-Semitism in this country.
Thank you. So it was the gentleman at the front, and we have a bit more time for contributions. Is there anyone that's got their hands up? I'll just see them. Okay, thank you. So I'll call the person at the front, and then this person with the glasses.
Yeah, I'd like to address what you were saying just now. Anti-Semitism does not come from the existence of the State of Israel. The pogroms were in 1882, 1881, long before. That was the first, in modern times, that was the first one since the Middle Ages, basically. The Holocaust preceded the establishment of the State of Israel. So we have to identify the source of anti-Semitism is the ruling class, divide and rule, etc., etc. We have to see where it comes from. Now, that's not to defend the State of Israel, don't get me wrong. But it doesn't come from there, it comes from before that. And we have to be absolutely clear on that. Now, this meeting is about fighting anti-Semitism. And we talked a lot about the anti-Semites and what they do. I think we need to talk about how you can actually fight it as well. And there's been a debate. In the Jewish community, there was a debate. And the debate was basically between those who said, you can't fight it, you have to go somewhere else, you separate off, it can't be done. We have the same sort of thing, the best thing we can have is allies. We have the same thing in terms of Black Lives Matter. People say, you can't actually have real solidarity. There's allies over there, but we are the people. And that was one current, and that led to Zionism. There was another current, a much bigger one actually, in the Jewish community that said, the way to fight anti-Semitism is to join with non-Jews, with the working class, with the people who are fighting the system that produces anti-Semitism in the first place. It was that was the debate that was taking place in the Jewish community. And we know who was fighting the system. Karl Marx happened to be Jewish. Leon Trotsky happened to be Jewish. Rosa Luxemburg happened to be Jewish. And not accidental, because what they said was, this is a system which is anti-Semitic and is exploitative. The way that we defeat anti-Semitism is to join with the working class movement and smash the system where it comes from. So we talked about the anti-Semites, the small groups here, the bigger groups there, which we're afraid of. Let's not forget where the bloody thing comes from. It comes from the system, and unless we join together, Jews, non-Jews, Muslims, gay, straight, trans, and working class with the RMT, and with people fighting the system, that's how we will beat it. There's two ways we do it. Number one is the class struggle, and number two is stand up to racism. It's when we talk about fighting the system, fighting anti-Semitism, I think you basically need to join the SWP, really. But if you don't want to do that, support the railway workers and join Stand Up to Racism, because Stand Up to Racism does take that on. We've got a banner in Edinburgh. I live in Edinburgh. It's against Islamophobia. Refugees welcome here, and against anti-Semitism. And we bring all that together, and it's when you fight the system, then you are actually defeating anti-Semitism. That's the only way to do it. No other thing will do it. And running away to Israel will not do that. But don't blame Israel for the existence of anti-Semitism. It's the system where it comes from. That's where it comes from. We have to be quite clear on that.
Yes, it's just the person in the glasses here, and then, the red glasses. And then that's going to be our final contribution, I'm afraid. But thanks a lot for everyone that has contributed. But
So my generation are going to be the next generation in Parliament. I'm actually 12 years old currently. It's my first time coming to one of these. I came with my mum. And I wanted to ask, what do you think will happen when my generation go into Parliament? Because I want to go into law and then go into politics. And it's my aim to be an MP when I'm older to help make a difference. And I wanted to know how you think in future, with next generations coming into power, how you think anti-Semitism will evolve and whether numbers will go up and down. And then my second point was, you were saying how numbers only started to rise again after like 2017. But did you consider the fact that that might be due to the internet and non-regulations on it? Because the internet exists, but there are little regulations on it. We try and act like there are, but there really aren't. And I think a lot of anti-Semitism comes from that. So I think we have to look at the reason anti-Semitism has risen over the years and tackle the reason first. And by tackling the reason, you tackle the people who say those anti-Semitic things. So my question was just also, how do you think anti-Semitism will evolve when people like me, 12-year-olds, will go into Parliament and, you know, become lawmakers or MPs or prime ministers and make a difference on these topics?
Okay, yeah, thanks a lot. So that's the end of the discussion, and now we're going to have Anna come back on all those great questions and contributions. But so first of all, I'll just say, remind everyone about bookmarks downstairs. But yeah, all right, Anna, if you want to go.
Right, thanks. Thanks, comrades, that was really interesting. So I'll start with your question on the internet. The point about the internet, it reflects the world that we live in. So you can use social media to get thousands of people on the Black Lives Matter protest from one person who puts it out there. At the same time, you can have horrible anti-Semitic conspiracy theories all over it. Gambling and pornography were massive industries before the internet. They are now even bigger industries because they're on the internet. And so I just think it reflects the world we live in. And that's just what I think about that. In terms of the increase in anti-Semitic attacks, I don't know about Germany, I haven't studied, but I've looked at the overview of anti-Semitic incidents in the EU, 2010 to 2020, and I'm just going to quote physical incidents and harassment. I'm not talking about the IHRA definition. So it's not the same in every country, absolutely. Every country has its own conditions, but as I said, the UK has gone up by 12% to 1,500 attacks last year. Austria went from 70 in 2010 to 585 in 2020. Belgium went from 1, I mean, these numbers obviously are not reflecting what's really going on, they're so small. Belgium went up from 1 to 18. The Czech Republic went from 47 in 2010, recorded incidents to 874 by 2020. Denmark from 5 to 79. I mean, I know these are small numbers, but I would argue that as a general picture, the attacks on, you know, when Nigel Farage suddenly comes out with George Soros is the most dangerous man in the world in 2019, that is a reflection of the process that's happening, not always that you see. In terms of Alex's point about the role of anti-Semitism, absolutely. I tried to say I think it is the glue that holds the far right together, because it does that thing, which is blame the system, be anti-capitalist. I mean, Marine Le Pen, how did she do so well? She went on about migrants, but actually she went on about the cost of living crisis. She went on about the things that were actually affecting people. And there's a quote that from Donny Gluckstein's book on the Holocaust, where he analysed the Nazi front pages, and I might get this stat wrong, so tell me off after. Something like the front pages, for a couple of years he analysed the front pages, and only something like 3% were actually anti-Jewish. The vast majority were anti-system. That's what they play on, and therefore anti-Semitism can play that role because it's the rich, it's the powerful at the top, it's the lefties on the ground, the scum of the earth and Weasley, and at the same time massively powerful, all at the same time, the hidden hand behind everything. In terms of the question you asked about Israel and it being helping serve this system, the question that was asked over there, what Israel's role in keeping capitalism going, I would argue that all the capitalist countries keep capitalism going. And Israel, it's sub-imperialism, it invades Lebanon, it goes into the West, it does all of that. So does Saudi Arabia, it's in Yemen, it serves capitalism, it's got its own interests. I just think that's capitalism, and I would never single out a particular country for being a pawn in that system. I think we have to be careful with that. In terms of Boris Johnson and whether he's a racist or not and whether we should quote him from long ago, I don't think we have to quote him from long ago. I only have to say one word, Rwanda. He proves by deeds, not words, what a racist scumbag he is. And that's all I'm going to say about that. In terms of the question on, which was answered quite well, about Israel now, I think we have to be really careful. Firstly, The far right, as I tried to say, do things like rehabilitate then racists. They don't go on about it. So the rise in anti-Semitism is part of the rise in the economic crisis and how they're going to deal with it for their side. And they're very hypocritical about this. We see, but you said it's hypocritical. We see hypocrisy all the time. Look at how the Ukrainian refugees are treated compared to the Syrian refugees, the Afghani kids, the kids who are dying in the Channel, all flown off to Rwanda. And this is not against Ukrainian refugees. They are real people, real refugees. But they are welcomed because a Tory says, because they look like us. He literally said you could live next door to them. So there is hypocrisy all of the time throughout the world in the attitude to various things, what's going on. And I think we also have to be really careful with our language. We never say a racist attack against a Muslim or a black person is silly or stupid. Silly or stupid kids. We don't use silly or stupid. We call it out as racist. And I think we have to be really careful with our language. An anti-Semitic attack is just as dangerous and just as wrong as an attack on any other group of people. That's number 6. Where's number 7? I didn't write enough. Right, okay. Just to come back to the last bit. So, I think I've covered everything. The parliamentary road that you described, you're 12, you want to be alive, all admirable stuff that you want to make the world a better place. So do we. I totally agree with you. My problem is, by the time you've got your law degree, which is in 9 years' time, God knows whether half of London's going to be underwater. I mean, not yet. God knows whether we'll have had a nuclear attack. God, who knows what will happen? And even if things go smoothly and you only owe £100,000 for your student loans to do all that, you get into Parliament, even if that happens, there could be 600 of you, fantastic socialist people, in what is an old Victorian building in the middle of town. Is it really where power lies? Of course it has the power to change our lives in so many ways. But is it really where power lies? We would argue that the real power lies in the boardrooms, lies with the state, with the army, lies away from the actual system, the running of, they are running capitalism. Parliament can't change that massively. And when they try, when you have really brave people, if Corbyn had got in, I mean, the general, before he even got in, said, you know what, we're not going to allow this. We'll have to get rid of him. Where a democratically elected government tried to do something, the organised state, the organised violent wing of capitalism steps in, and you get Chile and you get other places like that. So I think you should, I'm about to tell you to join. I mean, the thing about this meeting is it's not, and Laura brought it up. What do we do? As the SWP, wherever we are, we fight against the far right, we fight to flame the fans of resistance. We do that wherever we are. And as I say, it's not just about racism. We are supporting the strikes, being on the demonstrations, calling the demonstrations, supporting the direct action, which is why if you're an SWP member, you might be handing over a letter of solidarity to a victim of anti-Semitism one day and talking to striking workers the next day, because we have a world to win. And the working class is the only class that can smash capitalism, and it is made up of all races, all religions, all genders, all sexual orientations. And if you agree with us, you really should join us.